Get this party started. So welcome. My name is Alex Marici. I'm the vice president. I'd like to introduce Wendy Stanley, who is going to introduce our guest. And stay seated, have a good time. After that, we will be giving out certificates and pins to those who were not here at the last meeting. And Bill, I haven't seen Bill Rooney. Okay, he's coming, Bill Rooney. Okay. All right, what's he doing? Destination Capitol Hill for 5 minutes. So stay tuned. But in the meantime, here is Wendy.
Alex. It is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Michael Schatz to our APT meeting tonight. He prefers to be called Michael. Michael is a native of Philadelphia whose family has lived in the region since the turn of the 20th century. He holds bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees in education and Jewish studies from Vassar College, Arcadia University, and Gratz College. Michael is a career Jewish educator, currently serving as principal of the religious school at Har Zion Temple in Penn Valley and Eastern Regional Manager of Hebrew Helpers, Inc. Michael lives in Elkins Park and has been married to Elise, a reading specialist, for 32 years. They're the parents of 2 grown children, Leah, a reading specialist who lives in Center City, and David, a U.S. Marine who's based in North Carolina. Michael has been offering tours on Jewish history in Philadelphia and the surrounding neighborhoods since 2016. If you would like to take a tour with him or know more about it, please contact him at Philadelphia Jewish History Tours. Welcome, Michael, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for such a nice introduction. I want to meet that guy. He sounds pretty interesting. And thank you all for coming out and for inviting me to speak to you all tonight. So my understanding is you are all tour guides in Philadelphia, and you wanted a little bit of the Jewish story for your own interest and for when people ask you questions and you happen by some obscure date on a cornerstone that you don't know why it's there, or you do know something, but you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the historic Jewish sites around town. I got that right? Okay. I need these, and I need this, and I have to bend down to advance my slides. So you heard most of the background. There's not much more I can say, but that I always liked history, and the closer the history was to me, the more I was interested in it. So my family's been in Philadelphia for, as we said, 5 generations. 6 of my 8 great-grandparents were here. Even 3 great-great-grandparents were here and came from Eastern Europe between 1900 and 1915. So just for neighborhoods and orienting where we are, my mom's side lived for many, many decades in the Feltonville neighborhood. Anybody know Feltonville? Kind of off Roosevelt Boulevard. And I feel like I'm on my toes. I'm going to just do that. It's a little better. My dad's family lived on Richmond Street, kind of under where I-95 is today, and not far from a neighborhood that was called Jewtown, which is a real name. And most people have not heard of it, but I'm told if you go back to that section kind of near Allegheny Avenue, and you ask the people that live there now who are not Jewish at all, they'll tell you they live in Jewtown. So my parents later lived in the Northeast, and I grew up in the suburbs in Dresher, but we still counted ourselves as Philadelphia. And as you heard, I've been living in Elkins Park for over 30 years. So most American Jews have probably similar experience to me in that their ancestors came in that great wave of immigration between the 1880s and the 1920s, mostly from Eastern Europe, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But there were Jews in Philadelphia from 200 years before that. And we're going to start our story talking about them. There were Jews in Philadelphia from before there was a United States, from as far back as in the colonial period. In the 1800s, there were another group of Jews came mostly from German-speaking lands. It's like anachronistic to say Germany because it wasn't unified yet until the 1870s, but German-speaking Jews came to Philadelphia in the 1840s and 50s. And even before that, we talk about them as the Sephardi Jews. Is that a term familiar to some people? It means they originated in the Iberian Peninsula in Spain and Portugal, and they And that's where we're going to start our story. So I won't say more just yet. We use the date 1654 to talk about the very first Jews in the continental United States. Let me go a slide. So, just in brief, in 1492, besides for Christopher Columbus discovering America, it also coincided with the Inquisition and the expulsion from Spain of all the Jewish inhabitants. And some people converted and became Christians. Some people left, and some people suffered a much worse fate than that. Among those who left, most went, as you can see from my map, most went kind of east around the Mediterranean and seeded communities that existed until 1948. Others went west and north into London and Amsterdam, and from there to the New World, to some of the Caribbean islands and to South America. And among those, in 1654, the first group of 23 Jews left Recife, Brazil, and landed in New Amsterdam. And that's where the American Jewish history kind of starts. In the colonial days, there are 5 colonial Jewish communities. I'm sorry, I'm hearing something. It's okay. And when I take a group around, I always make them guess. And they usually come up with Philadelphia, New York. Some of them even know Newport. They usually don't get Charleston and Savannah. And invariably, groups will say, oh, Boston, right? Boston's one of those old cities. Boston did not have Jews. And you know why? The groups always like this. We all know the story of the Pilgrims and the Puritans, right? They came to America for religious freedom. And here in Philadelphia, we can speak about that because the Quakers were pretty good about religious freedom and tolerance for all kinds of people. The Puritans, not so much. They were more interested in religious freedom for Puritans, for sure not Catholics and for sure not Jews. And I don't even think they were so fond of other Protestants. There you go. So Boston's not one of them, and that's just the way it goes. So there's some dates noted on here. We're not going to worry about the dates too much right now. Here we go. So we know this map of William Penn's Philadelphia. Yeah, familiar? So William Penn's surveyor, Thomas Home, lays out this map, and they don't build the whole city just yet. And you know this probably better than me. They build just along the riverfront. People need to live close to the water. And the few Jews who were here lived with everybody else. There weren't so many. There are a handful of families in those early days. There's no community until 1740, and we'll get to that. They're like itinerant traders. Some people came from New York. There were people that had trading associations with relatives or friends or compatriots in the Caribbean, and they would have goods back and forth on their ships between the Caribbean and the colonies in the New World and in Europe. I have a thing. There we go. You see my little red dot? I'm supposed to not bend down so you can see me on the Zoom, but I'll try to do this. So we know that right here is Franklin Square up in here, and Washington Square here, and the Delaware River along here. So this part, like a little bit northeast of that part of Center City, that's where the original Jewish people lived. And interestingly, fast forward a couple hundred years, the original synagogue, Mikveh Israel, is still in that neighborhood, or I should say back in that neighborhood, and we'll get to that. So the first permanent settler that we know of is a man named Nathan Levy. And Nathan Levy, let's make sure I'm on the right slide. Yes. Nathan Levy was a merchant. He had ships. It said, although this may be a myth, I'm not really sure, it said that his ship, the Myrtilla, brought the Liberty Bell to Philadelphia. I don't know if that's accurate. If anyone knows for sure that it's not accurate, you can tell me after. But I've seen disputing comments in some of the literature. So Nathan Levy has this daughter that sadly died, and he had to find a place to bury her. So in the Jewish tradition, we don't have to have a dedicated worship space. You can have prayers in any room. We don't have to have, dedicated school buildings or things like this, but you needed a dedicated burial area. And that was so the first thing that seeded the community was the purchase of a burial spot. We're going to get to that in just a minute. We want to get to our picture of our Liberty Bell, which of course everybody knows, that iconic bell that represents Philadelphia to so many people. So as I said, It's said that Levy's ship, the Myrtilla, brought the Liberty Bell. It's possibly a myth. The other thing to share about the Liberty Bell is that verse on there, right? Proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof. That is from the Hebrew Bible. It's from the book of Leviticus. It's in fact the verse that was read in synagogues around the world just this last weekend, this last Sabbath. And it's talks about, it's not really about freeing slavery, it's about freeing people from debts. And that's what the reference is. But those words of freedom were really important to the early American philosophers and the leaders and some of the settlers that lived in and formed this new idea of a new country. So they liked using Hebrew names. You'll notice that there's Benjamins and Isaacs and Abrahams among the founding fathers that were certainly not Jewish people. And some of these ideas about freedoms and so forth that they got right from the Hebrew Bible, and was so important that they put it on that Liberty Bell. So here we go with that cemetery. So Levy buys this piece of ground on Walnut Street to bury the daughter, and just 2 years later, he kind of trades up and he was able to buy a bigger piece of ground on Spruce Street. Perhaps he reinterred the daughter. We don't know. The grave isn't marked. The earliest grave that's marked in this cemetery at 9th and Spruce, which still stands, and we'll talk about it, is Nathan Levy himself, who died in I have it here someplace, 1753. So the cemetery dates from the purchase we said in 1740, and it still stands. Think back to that William Penn map a few minutes ago. We said that the built-up city was kind of near the river, maybe as far west as about 6th Street. So 9th and Spruce already is the country in 1740. And that's important to know, because if you walk around some of the other very historic churches and religious places in Old City and in Society Hill, you'll see the churchyards right next to the churches, the graveyards. Jews don't do that. We build the cemeteries outside of town. So imagine in 1740, 9th and Spruce is outside of town. But that still stands, and Levy is there. As I said, there's many members of the Gratz family who were there, which we'll talk about in a little while, and others of these early Philadelphia families. So there's this very small group of people. There's not enough yet for a synagogue, although they have this piece of burial ground. Levy dies in 1753, as I said. 6 weeks later, arrives in this country a man named Bernard Gratz, comes from Germany, and he is then the next sort of leader of this very tiny, small community where people are all related and all know each other very, very well. A small circle of families. So what we find is I said it's about the Sephardi Jews, the Spanish and Portuguese Jews who left. Early on, even in Philadelphia, most of the members were not Sephardi. They were German Jews. And there's an A word that's the Hebrew word, thank you, the Ashkenaz Jews. I always find that a funny word. But that's what the Bible called the land that they thought maybe was Germany. So from about the 10th century, German Jews were known as Ashkenaz Jews. And as they migrated east, all those millions and millions of Jews in Russia and Poland that eventually get to the United States were the Ashkenaz Jews. So most of the members of Mikveh Israel, even in the early days, were not Sephardi. The way I see it is they got to Philadelphia, the pattern was set, the synagogue was Sephardi, they said, oh, okay, that's how they do it around here. There's a little more to the story, and I'll get to that. We do have early correspondence in Yiddish language, which was this Jewish-German dialect that's written in Hebrew characters. So we know that the Gratz family corresponded in Yiddish, as did many of the other early merchants. And we're going to go to, here we go, Rebecca Gratz, who's among the more famous of the Gratz family. This is her tombstone. I don't think that's the original. I think it was redone at some point in more recent decades. But she and many of her siblings and nieces and nephews and so forth are all buried in a section in that in Mikveh Israel Cemetery. We'll come back to Rebecca in a little while. We know, as I said before, they don't have a dedicated worship space. By the 1770s, there are records of rental properties that this fledgling congregation has. By 1775, we think there are about 300 Jewish people in Philadelphia. So it's already becoming a growing community. And they had a rental property on Sterling Alley, which was, I don't think it still exists, but it's a small street that bisects Cherry Street. And that's important in just a minute. This early on in all of the United States, there's no rabbis. There's no trained Jewish professionals of any kind. There may have been itinerant ritual circumcisers, because that's kind of a technical skill that most people don't have or care to have. There's the professional leaders. They can't call them rabbis. They're not ordained rabbis. They didn't learn what a typical ordained rabbi would know. They're the most educated of the lay people, and they're often called the minister, which is an interesting term. Sometimes in Hebrew, they're called the chazan, which is the word we use today for the cantor who sings the service in a synagogue. But in these olden days, in not just Mikveh Israel, but all around the country, those leaders, the ministers, were sometimes called chazan. So here's by 1781, a few things happen. We're finished the War of Independence. During the War of Independence, there's a large community in New York, another community in Charleston, and they were held by the British. So the Jewish people were mostly patriots and left those colonies to seek refuge in Philadelphia. And so there are enough that they start to organize the handful of Jewish families that are here, plus the new ones, into more of a congregation. I have some notes that I did miss, but we'll get back to it. So we have this sign, which is still there standing there on Cherry Street between 3rd and 4th. The sign is there, and that's the site of the original Mikveh Israel building that was the purpose built in 1781. Some of the things to know about that original building is that even before they had the building in 1761, they were able to borrow a Torah scroll, the Book of the Law, from the New York congregation Shearith Israel. So they think maybe that's the beginning of regularly held services. By 1771, they had silver Torah crowns commissioned by a silversmith named Meyer Myers. Great name, isn't it? Meyer Myers evidently was a prominent silversmith in New York, because he also made those Torah crowns for the New York congregation and this Newport, Rhode Island synagogue. And those were, in fact, part of a controversy recently with who owned that Newport synagogue. Was it owned by the New York congregation, or was it owned by the people in Newport who were going to worship there? So the silver crowns were in the news even as of late. I don't know. It's a good question. So here's the building. It's a pencil drawing, but it's 1782. I thought it was 81. Built at 3rd and Cherry Street. So this is their first building. And it's not just a synagogue, but it's the whole community, right? Any part of the Jewish community has to operate out of this organization. So they have a place for worship. Children were able to study there. So there's some kind of a school or a learning mechanism. All the Jewish charities run through there. They have that, as I mentioned before, the ritual circumciser. It's called in Hebrew the moil. They even have a matzah bakery, right? Because you can't just bake matzah any old place. It has to be special for Passover. So they have a matzah bakery in that building as well. So this is more on the European model, that the whole community is coterminous. And we're going to talk about when that ends. Even at some point there on the property, they built a home for the minister, and they built a mikveh, which is a ritual bath. We're actually going to mention that a little bit later as well. I will introduce you to someone who's responsible for kind of organizing that synagogue. And this is the first minister that comes to Philadelphia. Remember, not a rabbi, but he's the most educated lay leader of the New York congregation, comes during the War of Independence. His name is Gershom Mendes Satius. That's how you pronounce it, even though it's an X, Satius. And he is a cousin of the Levy family, who we mentioned before. His mother was Ashkenaz, his father was Sephardi. So he set the pattern that it would be a Sephardi synagogue. We think it's probably his influence to organize the ritual of the service, the order of the prayers, the melodies, and even the layout of the floor of the synagogue in the pattern of the Sephardi Spanish Jews. And that pattern continues today. And we'll see Mikveh Israel a little bit later. in the slide, and it said that their services have been uninterrupted since 1781. They have the same order of the service, the same melodies, the same traditions as they've had for hundreds of years, connected to the synagogues of Amsterdam and London and to the New York. It's called the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue of New York. It's on Central Park West, and they're very much connected in that way. Here we go. I want to meet. We mentioned before Bernard Gratz. This is his brother on the left, Michael Gratz. And they've become very prominent leaders, not just of the Jewish community, but of the general Philadelphia community. Michael Gratz has 12 children. He's a shipper and a merchant. Some of his children, his son Hyman, who's to the right, follows him into his business. His daughter is Rebecca, who was mentioned earlier, and we'll talk about her in a moment. And they are the leaders of the community. Here's Rebecca now. So Rebecca has a lot of stories about her. One is that she never married. She devoted her life to charitable works. She was involved in general charities of Philadelphia. Then she was involved with the other ladies of Mikveh Israel in particular Jewish charities. She started something called the Hebrew Sunday School Society, which was an organization that existed until maybe about 15 years ago. It was not connected to a synagogue, so it was community-sponsored Sunday school for Jewish children. She saw in the early 19th century, it was, I guess, the Protestant awakening, religious revival, something like that. And people were kind of dragging their Jewish friends to Protestant Sunday school. There was no Jewish Sunday school. And she thought that maybe we ought to have a Jewish Sunday school to fill that need and maybe keep our kids, in our religion and not susceptible to, I don't mean to sound pejorative, but, you do your own thing, we do our thing, and it's all good. So that's Rebecca. It's also, the portrait, she was evidently a very beautiful woman in her day, and she was meant to be the model of Rebecca in the novel Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. So that's a famous bit about Rebecca. And the last is that her name is carved in a building at 6th and Spruce, which you may have passed. It's today an apartment building, but at one time it was a home for, single girls that were immigrant girls at first. These poor, teenagers came from Russia with no language and no one to look out for them. They could get in a lot of trouble. And later it evolved to be for all kinds of young girls could have refuge and a safe place to live at the Rebecca Gratz Club on Spruce Street. This is Chaim Solomon. Have we heard of Chaim Solomon? Also has a plaque on the street I think that's the next slide anyway. We'll get to that. Chaim Solomon is said to be the financier of the revolution. So he helped to raise the money to pay General Washington's troops and to get the United States through this war. He had connections with the French and with overseas other bankers and so forth, and was able to raise funds even from his own pocket. And it said that he was never repaid and died a pauper. But the community remembered him, and they put a plaque on, there it is, the plaque on the street, on 4th Street, just outside the Mikveh Israel building, dedicated to Chaim Solomon. A couple other people I'll mention that I don't have pictures of, and other leaders of that early community. One was called Jonas Phillips. Evidently, his name had been Phoebus, and he anglicized it when he went first to England and then came to the United States. Another was Manuel Josephson, who is said to own the only shofar, the ram's horn that's blown on the Jewish New Year. So he owned the only shofar in Philadelphia. So he was important for that reason. And there you go. And the last one I will mention is Jacob Cohen, who was the minister after Seixas went back to New York. They found another minister called Jacob Cohen. I talked to you about the Gratz family already. Just to mention also, if you've seen their name about, there's a Gratz High School in Philadelphia. There's a Gratz Street. I think it runs between 19th and 20th and North-South Street. There's Gratz College, where I have 3 degrees from. So it's a name that was still around in institutions in Philadelphia. I don't think there's any more of the Gratz family that was left, although recently Gratz College found a young woman from, I think, Kentucky, whose name was Rebecca Gratz, who was a great niece of some sort of the famous Rebecca Gratz. Family's no longer Jewish, but she was, I guess, invited to come and kind of celebrate her very important ancestor and know that there's, I guess, the name is still out there in some places, Kentucky, evidently. So I mentioned a minute ago Jonas Phillips. So Jonas Phillips's grandson is Commodore Uriah Phillips P. Levy. And this statue stands on the 5th Street side of the Mikveh Israel building today. Uriah Levy was a Commodore in the Navy during the War of 1812. He was important in that he was a high-ranking Jewish officer, and realizing at the time Jews did not serve in the military in Europe. They were not really citizens. The United States is different, and Jews can be high up in the government. They can be high up in the military. And it's a different idea of citizenship, which we, of course, take for granted today. But 250 or so years ago, it was not so much the case around the world. And so Levy's, later on, there was a documentary, I think it was on Amazon Prime. His family bought Monticello from the Jeffersons. And I think it was called Levy's of Monticello was the name of the documentary. He helped to end the practice of flogging as punishment in the Navy. So that's kind of significant if you're in the Navy. And the statue was dedicated by a friend of mine whose name is Josh Landis. Josh Landis's father was Admiral Rabbi Aaron Landis, who was a high-ranking naval officer while being a rabbi at the same time. And his son Josh thought, to honor his father, we'll have a statue of Commodore Levy commissioned. So that's what that is there for. Here's a quote from, and this quote is on the statue. It says, I lost it. Here it is. I am an American, a sailor, and a Jew. So if that's how Commodore Levy saw himself, then that's what we'll share. In 1825, Mikveh Israel builds a new building on the same site. They call this the Egyptian Revival style. Kind of looks like it could be part of a pyramid, doesn't it? I think it's interesting. And they've subsequently had 2 more buildings, another one at 7th and Arch, and then later moved to Broad and York Street north of Temple University. And then in 1976, moved back into the Independence Mall area, which we'll see in a few minutes. Let's skip that. The last thing I want to tell you about the colonial period is to tell you that Philadelphia is the first city in the New World to have a second synagogue. A few minutes ago, I said that Mikveh Israel was the community. Everybody had to be part of the synagogue, or not necessarily, but any Jewish anything came through the synagogue. But in 1795, that changes here in Philadelphia with a second congregation, and it's a German congregation, right? So even if most of the members of Mikveh Israel were Ashkenaz, the synagogue Sephardi, newer German immigrants figured they want to have an Ashkenaz synagogue that will follow the rituals and melodies and customs that they're familiar with. So they start Rodef Shalom, not in this building, but in other buildings. By 1928, they built this building, which stands on Broad Street at Green, just north of Spring Garden Street today. And it's today the largest Reform congregation, probably the largest synagogue of any kind in the whole Philadelphia area. And the main building is kind of over here, the 1928 building. And maybe 15 years ago, they put on this big addition on the south side of the building. Is it? Could be. Could be. I think it's meant to be modeled after the Synagogue of Florence in Italy. It's quite grand inside with a big high dome. It's a very interesting place. If you have a chance to visit, you are, I'm sure, welcome to do that. Will mention though that 1928 building replaced on the same site a Frank Furness building from the 1860s, who's the well-known architect to probably most people, did the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts a few blocks away from here, and lots of other buildings at Penn and train stations and all kinds of things. So that is the colonial period, and I'm a little behind on the time I wanted to be at, but that's okay. We're going to progress forward. We're going to talk, bless you. Going to talk a little bit more about Center City and other sites, and then I hope we'll get time for the Jewish community of Center City today. So often when I give tours, I do what we call the Jewish quarter of Philadelphia, which is Center City. It's Society Hill and Queen Village. And it's that neighborhood that my ancestors and probably most American Jews' ancestors kind of came through. The famous sister neighborhood is the Lower East Side in New York, which was the destination point in Manhattan of hundreds of thousands of Eastern European Jewish immigrants. Philadelphia has a somewhat smaller version. I'll give you the populations that around the Civil War, there's about 12,000 mostly German Jews in Philadelphia. By World War I, so whatever that is a number of years later, there's about 200,000, most of whom have come from Eastern Europe. So I show you here, this is what Jewish Eastern Europe looked like. It's carved into three empires, the Russian in the east, the Prussia in the west, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the south. And I don't know if is the red dot working. Oh, good. I can't see it here. So it's all this area that once was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and it got divided up, but it was all the same Jews, all the Yiddish-speaking Jews that men dressed in black with long coats, and the women covered their heads, and very traditional society. I said Yiddish-speaking, right? That's probably the biggest common denominator that ties these people together. The differences are in the 1880s and 90s and early 1900s, the Russians were way worse to the Jews than the Austro-Hungarians. The pogroms, if you saw Fiddler on the Roof, is a scene of a kind of a mild pogrom. They were probably worse in real life. And all the anti-Semitic destructions of those Jewish communities caused this great migration. But at the same time, the Jews in the Austro-Hungarian Empire didn't have pogroms, and they left too. They were all desperately poor. The United States was this new opening country, and we all know this, the westward expansion, and people from all over the world were coming here to dig the tunnels and build the bridges and build the railroads and make the textiles for the new, you didn't have to make your clothes at home. You could buy them from a factory and all kinds of things. And the Jews were just a part of that story. So that's where we continue. And this just shows some of the places that those Russian Jews left, mostly the United States, but also going to other parts around the world, Western Europe and some even to South America and to Australia. So this is one of my favorite maps. Has anyone seen this before? So this is in the public domain. It's a mortgage industry map from the 30s done by a man named Brewer. And we look at it today and we say it's redlining, it's terrible. But when I look at this map, I see history, because I see that Brewer marks on this map in blue where the Jews lived. And that was like a bad thing, right? Don't lend money to people in those neighborhoods, they're undesirable. And in green down here in South Philadelphia, who's the green? Can you guess? The Italians, right? And you can see the line on 8th Street, right? You can't see that it's 8th Street, I'm telling you. If you go down like below Snyder Avenue, the area from like 3rd to 8th was an intensively Jewish neighborhood until the 1960s. And west of 8th Street was more Italian. Where you see pink on the map was mostly African American. And you can see these other neighborhoods. You can see Strawberry Mansion. You can see Winfield. You can see Logan. And I find this map quite interesting when I give talks about Jewish history, because we also know between the Depression and the Second World War, people didn't move that much. So these neighborhoods kind of held for, until the 1950s and 60s. We have a zoom in here of the Jewish quarter from that map, and you can see in the blue that kind of upper end of South Philadelphia, which today we call Queen Village, and a piece of Society Hill, was for the immigrants. That was the Jewish quarter. And we have some sites that I want to bring your attention to in the Jewish quarter. First is the B'nai Abraham Synagogue, which still functions and stands around 6th and Lombard. This is the oldest Russian Jewish congregation in the Jewish quarter. And this is what it looked like at its dedication in 1910. You can see the onion dome on the roof, which suffered a fire, and they don't have the onion dome anymore, but that was a style in those days. These are some of the up-close features. You can see the 10 Commandments way up at the tippy top, and that's the Hebrew carved above the front door that says Chever B'nai Avraham, the fellowship or the congregation of the sons of Abraham. Uh, and this is a picture of the interior with the group. It's really quite beautiful. Today, it's a Chabad-run synagogue, which is like an Orthodox outreach community that has a nursery school. They're actually in the process of opening a full-day Jewish school somewhere around 8th and South. It's going to be not directly in the building, but part of that community. It's pretty cool. If you ever have a chance to see the inside, you can see. I'm glad you think so. They're very welcoming is right. And I often am able to give tours there because except when their children are there for nursery school and they have tighter security there, welcoming of guests. You can see the upstairs women's balcony as in a typical Orthodox synagogue. The women and men sit separately. You can see the rose window at the far end. And it's really quite a beautiful place. This is the second of 3 functioning synagogues called Kesher Israel. It was built as a church. So we don't claim it's as old as a synagogue building as B'nai Abraham, although the building itself is much older. It became a synagogue in the 1890s, and it still functions today. Here's some of the interiors, which I think is even more beautiful than B'nai Abraham. They've been recently restored. It's a long story to go into, but after the Second World War, as most of the immigrants left the Jewish quarter and moved to new places, young Jewish people didn't really live there. And only in the last maybe 40 years have people come back and discovered these synagogues that never quite closed. Many, many more did close, but these kind of hobbled along in bad shape, and they've been beautifully renovated recently. This building is no longer a synagogue, but I point it to you because it still has its onion domes, first of all. It's on 6th Street, just south of South Street. And I don't know if you can see, maybe you can if the picture's good enough. Carved in some of these pieces, there's a Jewish star, there's Hebrew verses above the door. Those are no longer there. It was an antique mart for a while, and its last conversion to a condominium, they blasted all of those icons away, but they kept one. Above the front door, there's a menorah. And there had been a plaque on the wall telling the story that this was the B'nai Reuben synagogue and so forth. The plaque is gone, and I thought nothing of it until I learned a few weeks ago that somebody stole the Uriah P. Levy plaque from Mikveh Israel. So maybe somebody's stealing bronze plaques. I don't know. One thing to note about B'nai Reuben is it was built in 1904, so it actually predates B'nai Abraham because they had been in a church that they then rebuilt into a synagogue. So this was the first purpose-built synagogue in the Jewish quarter, but it no longer is a synagogue. And the third still functioning is the Society Hill Synagogue, which is on Spruce Street. It was built as a Baptist church. It spent many, many decades as the Romanian congregation of Philadelphia. And for the last about 60 years, it's been the Society Hill Synagogue and an active and growing and thriving congregation. This is some of the interior pictures. And there we go. This is no longer a synagogue, but once there were hundreds of row house synagogues around Philadelphia. There's 2. There's one on 4th Street around Snyder Avenue, and there's this one at 509 Pine Street. They call it the Vilna Shul. Vilna is the Jewish word for Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, which was a very important center of Jewish life in pre-war Europe. But the Jews from Vilna would find each other as they did from other hometowns in Europe, and they had an association, and they started this synagogue in the home of one of the members whose name was Abraham Abba Ben, the son of Yehuda Shapiro, and that was his house. It's carved above the door in Hebrew, those words. Today, it's not a functioning synagogue. What it is a mikveh. I mentioned that earlier. A mikveh is a Jewish ritual bath. Some people say it's like a baptism. I don't know if theologically it has anything to do with it, but the concept is something, a water ritual, and it's used for conversion to Judaism, but its most frequent use is married Orthodox women immersed in that ritual bath after their monthly cycles as part of Orthodox marital laws. So that's what's going on in that building today. This building no longer stands, but it was at 10th and Carpenter. It was a Hebrew school building called Toro Hall. Toro is the benefactor's name was Judah Toro, who was a New Orleans Jew in the 19th century who funded things around the country, not just in New Orleans, but here. And that synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island is called the Toro Synagogue. that's what stands on the ground today. It's a park, but on the plaque on the park, they have a picture of when it was Toro Hall. This is another Hebrew school building that's on Catherine Street, still stands, and today it is a condominium. You can see this is one of the places that the cornerstone, I have it on the next slide. Look, there we go. The cornerstone, if you can read it, I don't know if it's too light, has the Hebrew words Talmud Torah, the name, that's the Hebrew school, and it has the Hebrew date on it. And I'm told that the condo association is called the Hebrew School Condo Association of that building. So 4th Street was the main shopping street of the Jewish quarter. The Jews called it the Ferder, the fourth in Yiddish. And you can see a streetscape, and that's it. I don't think that's Catherine Street. I don't know why I said it was. I think it's, and I also spelled Catherine wrong. I apologize. It has an A. I have to fix the slide. I think it's Monroe Street. Next time, I will fix the slide. Here's another picture of 4th Street where you can see the push carts. So that was the tradition, was people would start with their wares on a push cart in the street. And then when they had enough capital, they could move inside and have a store, and they might have lived upstairs. When my dad was a little kid, they lived upstairs on 4th Street before he moved to Richmond Street. And this still stands. Remember the Essene restaurant at 4th and Monroe? So we look at, I always point out that bottle sign on the top. Looks like a wine bottle with a Star of David on the top. It had been the Margolis Wine Company. Evidently, Essene is no longer there. I don't know what's coming in. This is on 5th Street, the Bogoslavsky's Bakery, and their building is not particularly descriptive, except at the very top, you can see S.B. Samuel Bogoslavsky, 1914. So we always point that out. And I like to talk about trolleys. I'm sure there are people more expert than I am in Philadelphia transit, but trolleys once traversed the city all over and all the streets more. We didn't have subways like New York. We only have a couple of lines, but we have trolleys everywhere, and trolleys enable people to get clearly from one neighborhood to another. And this is that the Bainbridge and Monroe Street trolley that I think I'm told was the first electrified trolley in the city. So that's a little picture of a trolley. I remember as a little kid, my grandmom lived near Roosevelt Boulevard, so we would walk across the boulevard and take the bus to the L. And then we would take the L in town. You could see the windows of Gimbel's from the L station, and then come up and take the trolley to where my grandpa's work was. And that was an adventure if you lived in Drescher, where everything was by car. So was drawn to the city then. This building still stands, and it's not in Center City, but I'm showing it anyway. It's at 7th and Cecil B. Moore. And this was built for the Adith Jeshurun congregation, which is today in Elkins Park. But in 1886, they built this building. It's the oldest building built as a synagogue still standing. So today it's been converted from a church into a condominium. I haven't seen it in the last couple of years, but last time I was by, they were doing work on it. So I hope it's in pretty good shape today. It's kind of a cool building. The window above the door kind of looks like a rotary telephone, doesn't it? Isn't that interesting? And you can see it from the train if you take the SEPTA lines from the northern suburbs into the city. Look out the left side window and you'll see it. Or you can drive by or walk by it. 7th and Cecil B. Moore. All right, so this is Mikveh Israel today. It's between 4th and 5th, just north of Market Street, and it's the continuation of that synagogue that we spoke about quite at length earlier. Just outside the front door is this monument to Yonatan Netanyahu, who is the older brother of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin. And Yonatan Netanyahu is the only Israeli soldier who fell in the 1976 operation to rescue hostages in Entebbe, Uganda. It was a very important story in the time. And his father, Professor Ben-Zion Netanyahu, had been a professor on temporary assignment or whatever in Philadelphia, and this was their synagogue in the 1960s when both Yonatan and Benjamin were students at Cheltenham High School, and so the city committee or somebody, a committee, I'll put it that way, I don't know who it was, sponsored this monument, and they put it right outside of the current Mikveh Israel building. This is interesting. It's nothing special. It's a building part of the Pennsylvania Hospital, but it had been built as the Jewish Federation building at 9th and Pine. And if you zoom in on the cornerstone, you can see the Hebrew date, another one of those little hidden gems. The Jewish Y was at Broad and Pine, was known for much of the later part of its life as the Gershman Y. Later it was sold to University of the Arts, so I don't know what its status is today, but it still stands on South Broad Street. And another center city location is the Beth Zion Beth Israel Synagogue. It looks like a church because it was. They bought a church building in the 1950s, and it's continued to today as a conservative congregation in Center City. One of the interesting things about those Jewish quarter synagogues is they're all kind of independent. They're not part of national movements. Rodef Shalom on Broad Street is part of the National Reform Movement, and this synagogue is part of the National Conservative Movement. But most of the city synagogues are kind of independent, different from the suburbs, which I think is interesting. If you've not been to the Rosenbach Museum, it's owned by the library company. It's quite interesting. And they hold a number of portraits of the Gratz family in there. They were related. The Rosenbachs were book collectors and antiquarians, which is an interesting term. And they're brothers in the 19th century, and their home became this museum. They, as relatives of the Gratzes, they have some Gratz family portraits in there. I thought I'd show you. This was the first public menorah lighting in the country. This is a thing that you didn't do, right? Separation of church and state and all that. But somehow the Chabad in the 1970s were able to get permission to do a Hanukkah menorah lighting right there on the front of Independence Hall. And there, we tell the story of there were 3 Jewish-owned department stores, all German Jews, right, on Market Street. There was Litt Brothers, I mentioned Gimbel's a minute ago, and Snellenberg's was the third. Snellenberg predates me. I don't remember that one, but the other ones I do. And this building, of course, still stands, and you can read on the corner, right, hats trimmed, it still says. All right. And this is, many people don't even know about this, but the only renovated built room in Eastern State Penn is the synagogue, of all the things. Evidently, Mr. Fleischer was the chairman of the board or whatever of Eastern State Penn in the 30s, and he thought that the Jewish convicts ought to have a synagogue. And so he funded the building of this, and then about 15 years ago or something, it was renovated, and you can go have these tours of the prison, but you can see this, renovated synagogue in there. So if you've not seen outside of the Weizmann Museum of American Jewish History, they have the statue that says "Oi" on one side and "Yo" on the other side. It's, I think, classic Philadelphia, right? Right next to that is this monument to religious liberty that was part of the Centennial Exposition. And the sculptor's name was Moses Jacob Ezekiel. He was a Jewish artist, and it was commissioned by B'nai B'rith, 150 years ago, and we still have it here today, right outside the museum there. And this is the monument to the 6 million Jewish martyrs of the Holocaust. It's the first public Holocaust monument in the country, and it's here in Philadelphia at 16th and Benjamin Franklin Parkway. There's a whole plaza built around it, but the monument's been there for 60 or so years. The plaza is relatively new. They just a few weeks ago was the annual commemoration that fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors are around to participate in, but it's still going on, and the children, grandchildren, even great grandchildren are trying to participate in that. I was asked to talk about Center City today, so I want to just share with you a few notes, and I know we're very close on time, but I think I'm doing all right, right? So Center City today, this is a population map that the Jewish Federation did this in 2019. They found around 350,000 Jews in the metropolitan area, and they claim 124,000 in Center City. I think it's an exaggeration, but I don't know. I checked some other source that said the general population from Girard to Tasker, river to river, is 200,000 people. I don't know how it's 60% Jewish. I don't think it's accurate. But it's clearly there are a lot of Jewish people back in the city, as well as you can see some of the suburban counties have a lot of Jewish people as well. But I think that's interesting. When I do these tours in the Jewish Quarter, people will say, well, is this still a Jewish neighborhood? And I have to say, well, no, it's not. Like, people don't come here the way they go to, Crown Heights in New York or Williamsburg or places where you buy all your Jewish stuff, or the Jewish bakeries and all of that. But are there a lot of Jewish people? Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, whether it's the young professionals, whether it's the empty nesters moving back into the city, and families raising their kids and staying in the city and not running to the suburbs as they have for the last couple of generations. So I thought that was interesting. In terms of Jewish life, do I have a slide of that? I have a little bit of a slide of that. We mentioned a number of the synagogues already. There are others. There's a new synagogue called the South Philadelphia Stiebel. Stiebel is an old Yiddish word that meant like a private little synagogue that they would have in the rabbi's house in the old country in Europe, or in a small house even in America. And there's a new synagogue. What's interesting about it is it's an Orthodox synagogue where the leader is a woman rabbi, which you would think doesn't make any sense. And if you understand Jewish internal politics, that's a big line that demarcates the Orthodox from the non-Orthodox Jews is women participating in public ritual. But they found a way, and it's kind of interesting. And if you're interested in learning more, her name is Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter. Rabbanit is like the feminized version of the word rabbi, and she is the spiritual leader of this Orthodox synagogue. And we mentioned a number of the others. There's an aftercare program called Makom, which is on Washington Avenue in the Point Breeze neighborhood. There are a number of independent. A minyan is a small informal group of Jews that gather for prayer and different things. So there's a number of independent kinds of things. There's young people programs called Tribe 12 and the Moishe House. And there's a unifying organization called the Center City Kehila. Kehila is a Hebrew word which means community. And it's not like an official that you have to join and pay taxes the way it was in Europe, where there was an official community, but it's a loose confederation of many of the Jewish organizations in the city. And I know they're having a community-wide celebration and study night for the holiday coming next week called Shavuot, which is the 7 weeks after Passover. We call it the time of the giving of the Torah, and there's a community-wide study night. So there's a vibrant, active life and lots of culture. There's a Jewish Film Festival, the Weizmann Museum that we mentioned. There are all kinds of things through the universities, and the Jewish Federation's offices are in the city. And as I mentioned earlier, also, there's a plan for a full-day Jewish school. I know there are many children who live in the city who go to the Jewish schools in the suburbs if their families send them to a full-day Jewish school. There's plans to build one right in Center City. So I thought that was something to share. And with that, this is my, final slide, with my information on it. And I think we have time for questions. I didn't do too badly, huh? Thank you. I will take some water and please, question in the back. Go ahead. Yeah. Oh, we're waiting for the mic. Okay.
Hi. Hello. Thank you. Learned a lot. Was there a lot of anti-Semitism in the colonial days? You talked about the financier of the revolution was a wealthy Jew, other things like that. But I wondered,
in the colonial period,
yeah,
there were so few Jews that who were they going to be anti-Semitic about? Yeah, there were some questions. Jews can be citizens, but can they hold office? Pennsylvania was better than most states, right? Other states were in New York in 1654. The governor Peter Stuyvesant wanted to send them away, the 23 Jews that showed up. But remember, in the story of New Amsterdam it wasn't just a colony of a church or a religion. It was owned by the Dutch East India Company. And the company, the business, figured the Jews were good for business. So they said you have to keep them. So was there social anti-Semitism? Probably. Was there sanctioned government anti-Semitism? Probably not. Go ahead here, and then here.
Thank you. So my father's side of the family was very prominent in Philadelphia Jewish life around the turn of the century. And I know that we Jews, kind of got together and established a number of benevolent societies to help each other out. I don't know if this is in your realm of knowledge, But my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was a member of an organization called the Bessie Garber Link of the Eastern Star. I knew nothing about it except at her funeral in the late 60s, they came up and rang a little bell, which I and my cousins found very humorous. But what do you know anything about that organization or any other benevolent organizations that helped, especially Jews coming over to the workplace of the world, Philadelphia, trying to get a leg up, trying to buy property, how they were assisted by the community?
That's interesting. I've not heard of that one. There were all kinds of organizations, which I didn't really talk about at all. There were hometown associations, which in New York they called them a Landsmannschaft. It's a Yiddish word. In Philadelphia they called it a Verein, which in Yiddish means a union. So people would band together with their union and they'd send money back to the old country. They would lend each other and help each other in whatever ways they could. So there's a lot of that. Then there's like the B'nai B'rith and B'rith Shalom, which was a local Philadelphia-based fraternal organization. There were all kinds of charitable organizations run like that benefited women and children, or benefited orphans, or helped the sick, and a lot of them merged and became what's today the Jewish Family and Children's Service. So that may be some of the clue that the Jews were always pretty good at taking care of each other, like looking out as a big family. One of the things I find interesting is the ones that were here first, like the German Jews of the 19th century, had all kinds of support systems for the new arrived Russian Jews. And they used the term Russian to mean all of the Eastern European Jews. Well, I'm going to get to that. So part of what they would do is fund all kinds of social services and something called the neighborhood center and all kinds of things. They should stay and be well in South Philadelphia. Don't come live with us in North Philadelphia. We don't need to sit next to you at KI or AJ, but you shouldn't starve. So there was discrimination between the people that got here first and the ones that came later. Question, yes.
I'm 75, so this is a while ago. My maternal grandparents moved to New Bedford, and there was no synagogue. So my grandfather went to all the churches and sat in the back looking for one that he could send the kids to Sunday school.
Interesting.
He sent them to Congregationalist Sunday school.
Okay.
My mother was always very fond of Onward Christian Soldiers.
Interesting.
I always tell the story that Nathan Levy transported the Liberty Bell.
All right, so we
Why
think
do
we're
you
right.
think it's not?
I don't know. I looked it up, and one source said Nathan Levy brought down the Martilla, and another source said it's a myth. So I don't know. And I don't remember the source. So I'm
The
sorry.
first source.
I don't, if I'm speaking publicly, I don't like to tell a story that's not valid. So I'll give you both sides and you can decide.
So as long as we're talking about myths, I've read accounts that you call him, I call him Sixtus, you call him
Satius, yes.
Satius wrote a copy of the Declaration of Independence in Yiddish and sent it to London.
Could be.
And it evidently perplexed the British intelligence so badly that they couldn't figure out what language it was written in.
That sounds familiar. I think I did just read that. There's a book called, the authors are Wolf and Whiteman. And the story of that book is I've had it for decades. And I lent it to my neighbor who is a scholar, Rabbi Lance Sussman. I don't know if his name is familiar to you. He's a scholar of American Jewish history. And he borrowed it and moved twice since and still has it. But I had another rabbi friend who recently passed away and left about 20,000 books in his basement. And his wife, Barbara, recently called me and she said, I have this book that I think you might be interested in. Sure enough, it's another Wolf and Whiteman. So I have it again. And I think that's where I saw that story.
So the other question I'd like to ask, though, is can you elaborate on the role of the Jews of Philadelphia in the non-establishment clause of the First Amendment?
There was that, I'm reminded, I was in my notes, but I forgot to say it, about the letter that George Washington wrote. There were 4 or 5 of them. And so George Washington wrote this letter perhaps he was requested to write this letter, and one went to the Touro Synagogue in Newport, one was here, one was in, I think, Savannah. And the letter says to bigotry, no sanction. And there was another part, it's in my notes, I forget what it is. And it's perhaps it was his way of saying everybody's welcome here. And it's not going to be about what religion you practice. This is a different kind of a country. And well, that's a little bit more to the story that I don't really know about, but that letter is very important, and that had multiple copies. Mikveh Israel is holding their copy of that letter in a display in their lobby today. So there's definitely something to that.
I just wanted to point out last thing, that in terms of anti-Semitism, across the street from the Free Quaker Meeting House, there is a marker dedicated to a guy named David Salisbury Franks. He was the aide de camp to Benedict Arnold. And when Arnold betrayed the Patriots, they accused Franks of betraying the country too. But he's like, no, I wasn't a part of it. But he still stayed with the Continentals. So that is an instance of Arnold actually wrote the letter. Right.
Interesting.
All right. You have a good question?
Yeah.
Okay.
You talked briefly about Rebecca Gratz's great-great-granddaughter?
Niece or something.
Niece
Yeah.
From Kentucky, was it?
I think it was.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar.
So what struck me was that she was no longer Jewish.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, was that sort of a trend at some periods of time where Jews like leaving their faith? To what extent did that happen?
In those early days, there were so few Jews. Perhaps part of why Rebecca never married was she couldn't find a Jewish man that wasn't related to her. And there were a handful. So they would, go from here to Savannah to find somebody, or Lancaster, or back to the old country. And many, I think more often, Jewish men would marry Christian women, and they would raise the children to be Christian, and the man would keep going to synagogue, but that would be the end of the Jewish line of their family. And they didn't have a whole lot that they could do about it. America was such a backwater for Jewish life in those decades of the early republic, that there were no rabbis until 1840. There's no Jewish learning. The fact that any stayed connected at all is kind of amazing.
All right, one.
I'm not leaving so fast, so I'll stick around even after it's officially over.
I have one more question, which is, can you talk a little bit about when Jewish people started to participate in government? Because there was some other talk here during training, and nobody remembers it, but I do, where the Jewish people, because you had to swear on a Bible, they didn't want to participate or, be sworn into government. And I thought I heard at some point that here in Philadelphia, the rules were changed so that they could swear on the Jewish Bible, and that started here in Philadelphia.
Sounds plausible. There was I forgot his name, but there was a pretty early House of Representative congressman that was Jewish from Philadelphia. Sorry? No, way before that, in the 19th century. I forgot his name. I'm sorry. So that's pretty early on. Then not so much for a while, but then in the last 50 years, there's been quite a lot of Jews in Congress, including the governor today. If I recall, he swore in on like 3 different Bibles, all, Old Testament Bibles that he had accumulated in different important parts of his life. So.
Need the microphone.
Oh, thanks. In certain places, the Constitution, the state constitution said if you were not Christian, you cannot hold office. You had, right.
But likely the Quakers would have insisted Pennsylvania be an early adopter of not doing that. Okay.
I have a super quick answer to that question about when in Pennsylvania Jews could run for office. It was 1790. I was just happening to read it today.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
Before everybody leaves and before we stop thinking about Jewish topics. Oh, we're not done?
Michael, I can't say hello to you because you're a cousin.
Oh, very good.
So I'd like to invite Bill Rooney up to tell us about his visit to Washington, D.C. I was going to do
All right, you guys, so just a few more minutes. Bill Rooney, he went to Destination Capitol Hill. So that's a lobbying event for the tourism industry that happens every year in the spring, usually March or April. And none of us on the board were able to go this year. So Bill was the representative from APT. So he's going to do a short presentation now talking to you about this experience lobbying for tourism in DC in this sort of craziest of all crazy years for tourism, right? So it's be really interesting to hear what he has to say. Let's give him a nice warm welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a little crazy year. It has been a crazy year for travel and continues to be. But this event, Destination Capitol Hill, was sponsored by U.S. Travel Association, which is an organization that brings together travel industry leaders from all aspects of travel, hotels, conventions, visitor centers, and tour guides. And, you know, it was a great way to increase APT's visibility. And, you know, they called it an advocacy event, which translates to lobbying. So I was a lobbyist for a day. And the first day consisted of extensive training. It was in a hotel ballroom, really, with people from all over the country representing different aspects of the travel industry. And it was really, the first day was really a training session on when you're meeting with your legislators. And they talked about the key issues that we wanted to present to the legislators. So the Pennsylvania delegation had 10 people, about evenly distributed between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And, you know, they went through some of the issues. This was right after the most recent government shutdown. So that really hit the air travel industry hard between the air traffic controllers and the TSA agents. So one of the most important things that U.S. Travel wanted us to talk to legislators about was preventing those kinds of disruptions to air travel and continue to get people paid, the TSA agents and the air traffic controllers. I feel like especially the air traffic controllers we want to pay. And another lobbying point they wanted to focus on was preventing harm to international inbound travel. And Marianne actually sent out an email about the visa waiver program. There's a visa waiver program that the U.S. has with 42 different countries. And so we have close security partnerships with them. And so you don't really need a visa with those countries, but they're talking about charging additional money even for those countries. And CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, has proposed collecting all kinds of excess information. It looks like an enhanced visa program, so all kinds of information that visitors, you know, had in their social media feed, all kinds of different data elements, personal information about family members going back 10 years. So that's not yet in place, even though it passed Congress. So we're lobbying the legislators to not implement that. And then they also wanted to promote international visitation to all regions of the United States. And another aspect of the one big bill was the visa integrity fee, which U.S. Travel is calling the travel deterrence fee. So it's like an additional $250 for people to come into the country. So they kept giving the example of a family of 4 from Brazil, for instance. You know, since Brazil is going to be in the U.S. For the World Cup, family of 4, their fee would go up to $1,000. And that's before they pay for hotels or transportation or anything. So that hasn't been implemented yet. They're talking about waiting till after the World Cup to implement it. So something that we're talking to the legislators about. And then there's also a thing called Brand USA, which is to promote international travel. And the United States doesn't have a travel agency for the whole country. You know, each state and city and locality has them. So Brand USA was something like that. And they used to get lots of money from fees, but those were cut way back from $100 million a year to $20 million a year. So lobbying the legislators to restore that money. So each state delegation, and there was an app that they used, and so all your meetings were scheduled in this app. So that was pretty cool. And so each state delegation had meetings set up. So we met with both senators, and then when we went to the House of Representatives, we met with Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. So it was kind of funny. It went from a really large meeting to a very small meeting. So Senator McCormick had a meeting in the Senate Visitor Center. It was kind of the size of a hotel ballroom. And he just kind of addressed the crowd, took a few questions, and then, you know, his staff members were circulating around the room, and, you know, you could buttonhole them and get your ideas across. And then Senator Fetterman's office, all 10 Pennsylvania delegates met with a staffer in Fetterman's office, and then we went to Brendan Boyle's office, and 5 of us from Philadelphia met with him, and then by the time we got to Dwight Evans' office, there were just 3 of us, me and 2 people from Visit Philly. So it was an interesting way to represent APT and network with other members of the travel industry. And, you know, most of you have probably been in Congress Hall. And so when you're on the first floor of Congress Hall, and it's kind of, you know, simple. I don't want to say plain, but it's a simple design. And then when you go up on the second floor and you see the Senate, it kind of feels that way today too, because when you're in the Senate, everything's really nice. And when you're in the side in the House of Representatives, it was, you know, just people streaming through the hallways. The representatives are just going by, and because since the government shutdown had just ended, it wasn't just U.S. travel lobbying. There were all kinds of organizations lobbying at the time. So the halls were just filled with representatives. So it was a good experience and a good way to get APT a little bit of visibility. So do we have any questions? I can repeat it.
All right, so I just wonder, with all of the craziness, you know, going on with everything in the government now, you know, was there any kind of like, I don't want to say nastiness, but was there any kind of like pushback or any kind of like any uncomfortable conversations or anything? I just wonder like how it went.
No, it
given
didn't
everything.
feel uncomfortable at all. And, you know, when you were meeting with the staffers who are inevitably very young, you know, the government is really run by young people. And anytime you mention one of the Senate bill numbers or the House bill numbers, they wrote it down. You know, they were taking notes all along, but especially when you mentioned, and we were given the bill numbers. So when and that gave me the impression, I don't know if this is naive or not, but that gave me the impression that they were going to take that and, you know, meet as a staff and talk, all right, what can we do about this bill? Where do we stand on this? So definitely got a feeling that we were being listened to. Maybe that's good politics, but I didn't really see any kind of tension or anything. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so now the last bit of business is, except we'll hear from this gentleman as well, but I wanted to give out the certificates and the pins to those who couldn't make it at our last meeting. The certification exam was given on March 14th. So I have Malcolm Stanley, and if you would stay up here, please, after, so we may take a photo. Woo! Woo! Congratulations. Awesome. Michael TA, did I say that correctly? Okay. Woo! Good job. Thank you. Okay. Do we have Maggie Hayes? How about Elizabeth McMorris? And oh, hi, Elizabeth on Zoom. And finally, Mark Responti. Okay, so we'll take a quick picture and then I think you had a question, right? Or an announcement? Okay, so we'll wait till after. Come on up. And thank you to those on Zoom who joined us and everyone else who came. Don't go yet. Don't go yet.
Yeah, Michael's going to come up and give an announcement. And also, anyone who's here, if you did not sign the attendance sheet yet, please do sign it before you leave so we know who's here. We'll let Michael give his announcement here. This is Michael Carver. He's one of our newest members this year. If you haven't met him, you may have seen him around town in one of his colonial costumes or brewer costume. And if you look at the one sculpture in the visitor center, Michael is actually on it in the colonial costume. So an APT member on the one sculpture in the visitor center. We've definitely have achieved greatness now officially.
I didn't know I was on the one sculpture. And I'm surprised I'm not on the Rittenhouse one sculpture, but I'm on this one. So that's interesting. While we're talking about Jewish remembrances, I have an announcement that I just met with a rabbi this afternoon from Mikveh, Israel. And the Sons of the American Revolution always do a presentation of honors at Washington Square at 3:00 on Memorial Day. This year at about noon, we're also going to be presenting at Mikveh, Israel. So this is a unique opportunity for them to unlock the gates. You can come in, you can, visit the graves of some of our best patriots, plant a flag, show your respects, and then join us again at the Tomb of the Unknown as we present colors there as well. Again, Memorial Day. I'll get the dates out to Marianne later, but it'll be about noon at the cemetery.
Oh, yeah. So a couple announcements I'll tell you quick, and then Michael is still here. If any of you, have any questions you want to ask him before you leave. I don't just remember the first one. What's the date today? 13th. Okay, so Saturday is the History Matters. So if any of you want to come out between 1 and 4, we already have our volunteers set up. If you want to come and just hear some stories of underrepresented history, especially Black history, come to Independence Park on Saturday, 1 to 4. We'll have a table in the visitor center. On Monday, it's this Monday, right? Yeah, the Michael Numis. We're going to have Michael Numis, the city director for 2026, and Maddie and Tom Karamanico from Independence Historical Trust. They're going to do a panel about everything that's coming up now for Philly 250. That should be really good. And then Tuesday is McGillen's, right? Right, Vince, right? Tuesday, 6:30. Yeah, we need a head count by when today? Okay, so Monday, make sure you register online. It's $10. So go online and pay your $10 fee by Monday, so because they want a head count before we go on Tuesday. And book club is Wednesday, the Quakers in Exile book. So read it really quickly if you haven't yet, and show when. It's only 166 pages. We're tour guides, nothing. And those are the upcoming ones. And then I know May 27th, we have a webinar on Anthony Benezet. So big abolitionist influence, Quaker influence. So if you want to hear about that, all these things are free, right? Except the McGillen's is $10, which is a really good deal. We're going to have a talk and you get a drink included with that $10. So pretty good deal. And I think there's anybody have any other announcements? Zoom, yeah. Monday is a Zoom meeting. McGillen's is in person. And Wednesday, the book club is Zoom. And the 27th is Zoom. Yeah. Yeah. And Stephen has an announcement. What's neighborhood tour? Oh, the Johns neighborhood tours. Yeah, they're going to start end of May. Charlie doesn't know when they're starting. Walton isn't here. I think, oh, Andrea, is she still here? Did Andrea leave? I think she left. I think they're doing the early ones, but I think it's late May. They're going to start. They're going to be every weekend through like September or October or something. So definitely look for those. The info's in the newsletter, and Stephen has an announcement. And what did somebody tell me before I started talking? Oh, you told me. What did you tell me, Alex? Oh, that Michael was here. I told you that. Okay. So now Stephen has an announcement.
Hi, everyone. May 21st, 3:30, the President's House, Philadelphia City Council has announced that it's Only Judge Day. So I think it would be great to have a good presence. 3:30, May 21st at 6th and Market at the President's House. I think it would be great to see you all there. So that's it. Thank you. 3:30, May 21st, Thursday. I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you guys all for coming, and thank you on Zoom for coming. We appreciate you.